Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar, How to Size a Mobile App Development Effort. My name is Adam Bookman, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. Just a few housekeeping items. To ask questions, please use the Q&A function on your WebEx screen. In addition, we encourage you to ask questions on Twitter using the hashtag #MobileStrategy. And please go ahead and follow us at Propelics on Twitter. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available after the webcast, as well as the slides. Before we dive into the webinar, I'd like to give you a brief background on Propelics. Propelics creates mobile strategies and world-class apps for the enterprise. We're 100% focused on mobile for the enterprise. We have a long track record of working with Fortune 500 clients, helping them strategize, plan, and implement various disruptive technologies. We're based in Silicon Valley, and we have consultants throughout North America, and we deliver engagements globally. Propelics engages with our clients in 3 ways. First, we run a series of business and technology strategy workshops designed to help our clients quickly get going with their mobile strategy initiatives, both on the business side and the technology side, including helping companies with their mobile app portfolios, helping them plan their mobile initiatives, figure out what apps to build, what order they should build them in, how mobile fits into their overall enterprise corporate strategy. And we help business teams prepare for mobile, for the wave of mobile, making sure that they're ready for mobile from a people perspective, a process perspective, and making sure that they're ready with the new technologies that come with mobile, like MDM and mobile application development platforms. We also do a lot of work with Mobile Center of Excellence creation. The second way that we help our clients is through a series of through our mobile advisory services, where we offer ongoing mobile support, mobile mentoring. We do a lot of executive education and participate in a number of speaking engagements. Finally, and the topic of this webinar is on mobile application development, and we have some great services around UX design, around mobile app strategy and planning, and then mobile application development. I'd like to now introduce you to our speaker, Larry Lauvray. Larry is a co-founder of Propelics and a partner here. He is a senior mobile solutions architect. He's been working in mobile since 1990. Larry heads all of Propelics delivery, and we're really happy to have Larry on this webinar. I'd encourage you to stay tuned after Larry's talk for some Q&A and a special offer for webinar participants. And now I'd like to hand it over to Larry. Take it away.
Super. Thank you, Adam. Okay. So, excuse me. Thank you for joining today. Today we'll be talking about the mobile applications and how to estimate the size and cost for developing your mobile apps. As a note, we all know these come with many variables. It drives different size, time, effort, costs. These will vary by region, individual company policies, governance, resource costs, and general just integration and application complexity. So there's a lot of variables, and we're commonly approached with a great app idea, and the first 2 questions. How long is this going to take and how much is it going to cost? Unfortunately, there's not really a cookie cutter answer to that, but we've over time come up with maybe what could be a simpler way to take a look at it, and we want to share that with you today. Based on the past deployments, we can create just a basic straw man for answering the question without a big work breakdown, pricing calculator exercise. Many of the enterprise learnings that you have today, based on your existing SDLCs and application development exercises, apply your learnings and everything from your testing to the actual SDLC, agile development methodologies. But there are some mobile nuances. So as we go through the deck today, what I'll do is I'll try to point out some of the areas where mobile may be different and where you would want to apply additional focus. So before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about some of the key trends and what we're seeing, just mobile in general, some of the growth patterns there. And then we'll talk a little bit about the sizing approach, development effort, risks. We'll talk a little bit about factors for where your organization may need to apply additional time or FTEs. We'll talk a little bit about the difference of that. And then some of the costs and how to contain some of the costs, some tips and tricks towards the end. And then at the end, we'll leave a little bit of time for Q&A. So our moderator will be monitoring the text questions that's on the panel. So with that, let's get into it. Our topic, basically, what are the key factors that drive our enterprise mobile app development costs? Some of the key considerations, a lot of these apply, maybe outside of mobile, but when we talk about mobile specifically, we're talking about the users. Which users am I targeting and what roles are they playing? Which scenarios? So is it a enterprise looking at the customer? Is it an enterprise scenario within the enterprise? There's a lot of different variability with that. And we'll extend it also to what locations. So when we talk locations, are we in the car? Are we at the office? Are we at a client site? Are we on the road? Do we have access to the internet? All of that, which leads us into the standalone. Are we working with remote data, remote connectivity, or are we actually on the application and it's self-contained? Differences of how you architect it, differences of the cost and time and resources. It also leads us into just the enterprise integration. So when we're talking through and thinking through security requirements, on-device data, data security in flight, where the encryption will apply, device wipes, there's a lot of pieces we need to think about through that. And then just general operating systems. So which device type? Is it a phone? Is it a tablet? Is it a specialty device? Which operating systems? So that's, are we going to deploy on Apple's iOS? Are we going to deploy on an Android with a Java platform? Symbian, Windows, BlackBerry, the list is long. So, there's not, again, a cookie cutter for that, but we do want to critically think which operating systems we're going to deploy on, because there's a very steep cost multiplier. The more systems we want to operate with, there's a cost multiplier. We'll talk through that. And an often overlooked factor, just our corporate culture. So mobile's new enough and moves at a much different pace than typical enterprise application development life cycles. So everything from what we do with requirements and how we get requirements approved, and the whole build all the way through testing and even into user acceptance and rollout to deployment. So those timelines typically can be fairly large, teams can be fairly large, approval processes can be long, and typical enterprise systems. And that really needs to be looked at with mobile. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. Okay. So just what's going on in the industry today? Oops. What's going on in the industry is explosive growth. So, when we're looking at all the companies and the conversations we're having, out of the Fortune 1000 CIOs over the next year, 90% plan to deploy a mobile app. Huge implications as far as thinking about mobile first. That's a common buzzword today, but it's true. It is true for designing the user experience, planning the staff around that. There's different roles included with user experience, mobile roles versus, maybe the website. And lead times. We want to think through, when we have a mobile app idea, what's it going to take from inception to deployment? What's the window, minimum window, maximum window that we need to plan for? 90% is a huge number, and it's impacting all resources, and it's impacting focus of which applications and which even enterprise applications are being pushed in lieu of mobile. So the methods of interaction. So what we're seeing is from a desktop is starting to flatten out as far as where applications are being consumed, content's being consumed. There's the lean back, lean forward, lean back, more consume, more inbound data consumption, video, more lean forward consumption, the social aspect, the creation aspect. So mobile, the growth of mobile makes us rethink what our users are doing, how we're engaging them. We just want to create an experience that brings them back. The user experience is key, and that's one of the main differences, if you will, with mobile. You start with the user experience first. With all the consumerization of all the mobile applications, it set the bar high for our enterprise customers. So I'm not going to dwell on this. I want to get into some of the app sizing, but just to give you a magnitude and scale here, you can see mobile web and the effort and the usage of a mobile web versus the apps. It's the old thick client, thin client conversation. The rich experience, speed, navigation, gestures, all that you get with the rich on-device applications is really setting the bar high, and that's really where the users begin judging their experience. So let's jump in. So let's talk a little bit about, when we're asked the question, what key decisions do we need to think about? The first thing is, how long is it going to take and how much is it going to cost? So let's think through some of the key decisions and key questions we want to ask, and we'll talk about just the overall approach. So we'll box it up into 3 big boxes and say, here's kind of the way you want to think about it, and then we'll get into some of the details around just creating a basic timeline, and then after we create a basic strawman time, we'll come back and do adjustment factors. These adjustment factors will be FTE effort, so maybe we can double up roles and apply just more work effort to an existing timeline, or some of the items may actually create a longer critical path, so we'll have to add time to some of the more complex items. So we'll talk through that a little bit. But first, so what are our key decisions? Excuse me. A lot of where we start is, what type of mobile user interactions are we expecting? Is it informational? Is it an app that does lookups and BI, and it's just basically a portal? We're going to go look up information. Is it transactional? Is it a wish list, shopping cart, checkout, pricing, costing, all that? Is it operational, forms, calculations, or is it a collaborative application? Maybe a boardroom, multi-vote, maybe it's a social component, feedback, all that. So when we think about how we're going to interact, the user experience, that kind of sets the tone for where we're going to apply the skills and effort, and which users we want to engage when we're doing the requirements and understanding the flows. Just around the clock here, at the 1 o'clock position, which devices? So a phone, you plan that differently than a tablet, and you plan that way differently than the specialty devices. There's some hardened specialty devices in the field today, still in the mobile platform. So we need to understand which devices are going to be part of this, maybe an operational type application. On around the clock here, which app will work online and offline or sync? So you plan, the on-device database, you plan the integrations, you plan even the versioning. So if you have data and you have to manage the versioning of which updates was performed last back to a host, that comes into play also. And then the system integration. So a lot of the system integration learnings over the years and all the applications, we have on the call today, we have a good mix of business and technical, I would expect. A lot of the mobile integrations track closely to the learnings you have today on your integration platforms. If you have a central enterprise data rules engine, if there's central data, we need to either update or read. And then there's the enterprise user authentication. That's the LDAP, the AD, the PIN codes, all that type of thing. So, a lot of that mobile can leverage maybe what's in the cloud or what's in the service bus today. On around the clock here, native. Are we thinking that these are typical native iOS or Android gestures, typical controls, or do we need to think through and build something custom that maybe not part of the typical control stack? That will create effort and testing and development and mock-ups and the whole piece. Which operating systems? iOS and Android, Symbian, BlackBerry, Windows. There's so many. So, not every application. I think this would be a key takeaway. Not every application needs to be deployed on every OS, on every operating system. So when we think through this scenario, we want to be critical because there's cost, risk, maintenance. There's so many things involved, different skill sets per OS. So with a critical eye, we would want to, if we're gonna, from a tips and tricks, want to manage the cost, then let's squeeze it down to the right operating systems that we need to deploy to. And finally, the last piece is more obvious, I guess, just the general span of the app. So, what's the app footprint? How many screens do we have? Not necessarily just the gestures and navigation between, just how big is the app. So those are some key, first line of defense questions, when you're asked about how much an app costs and what time it takes. These are the top level things that you really want to think through. From an approach of sizing, we'll step back just a second here. We'll break it down into a 3-step process. And as I said in my opening statement, you can break out the work breakdown structure and the typical FTE per week, per PM, per whatever. But what I've tried to do is kind of streamline it just a little bit and give you more of a rule of thumb, and then we can apply the corporate adjustments based on your individual situation. So if we start with step 1 on the left, we have an application portfolio. This would be all the list of good ideas we have for applications. We tie that in with the market opportunity. So here's our list of applications. We have a business driver for more customer retention. Maybe there's a revenue, there's a cost savings, there's so many. Once we get that and we solidify that, we can create our interaction flow. So this is nothing more than what are we going to accomplish? What is the app going to do? And what the app is not going to do is just as important. So we'll think through just a basic process. There's a login, there's a PIN code. We're going to do a lookup. We're going to type in a form. We're going to add information. There's some integrations maybe back to a different system, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll talk through some of that. So after we create that interaction flow, in our step 2, we'll want to kind of start segmenting that up into what are screens and kind of start understanding the span of what the application will look like. This is when our user experience engineers kick in hard. They're able to say from a 15-step process, this looks like maybe 7 or 8 screens, and these screens, they can help us focus to make sure they're clean, make sure they're intuitive. So, we'll create a baseline of there's so many screens in this flow. We'll make some estimations around, at least a baseline estimation of 1 week per screen. But then the critical part is the adjustments. So these effort adjustments, again, we talk a little bit about the culture of the organization. What's the governance and what are the processes in place that we're going to have to abide by for approvals, for reviews, et cetera. The next bigger piece is the app integration and complexity. What do we have to talk to on the back host systems? What security do we have to work through, et cetera, through the firewall? These are all behind the firewall apps. And then the final piece is, we talk through multiple operating systems and multiple devices. So and we'll talk through the examples and how each one of these impact which piece of the project. Once we understand we have our basic timeline, we have our basic time and effort adjustments, then we'll finalize what the critical path will be. We'll see which roles we can double up to keep the timeline short, but we still have to account for the effort, and then we'll apply some hourly rates. So we'll walk you through now. We'll walk you through a little bit of how that might apply. In the example I gave, we'll make the go-in assumption that a 1 FTE work unit, per week is basically what we're going to allocate for the screens. If we break that down, just without saying how many weeks and how much time, a quarter of your effort will go into the application visualization. This is I told you I'd point out where mobile's different. Mobile's different. At this point, your application visualization is the starter point. This is how you get the users engaged. This is your rich experience. This is your iterative design. So this is your screen mock-ups, your click-throughs, your prototyping. Your stakeholder buy-in comes from this stage. This is where you'll want to make your investment as far as understanding the first, before you get into the development, you want to understand exactly what's going to be developed. The middle of the project, the middle 50%, if you will, the middle half, is the actual development itself. So this would be, you know, if you're in Android, it's the Java. If you're in iOS, it's the Xcode. It's, you know, whatever the language is, and you're running that in parallel with, you know, any integration and development exercises. For this exercise, we'll say it's not integrated. You know, we're thinking 1 FTE, and the last step is, you know, the last quarter of the project is your UAT and acceptance. So this from a baseline perspective, with you know, what we would consider maybe a basic flow, you know, in our use case, we have the 8 screens. So this would allow a tester to do the gestures. This will allow all of the sample mobile testing, quality assurance, if you will, and the user's adoption, just to make sure that the users on device can test and flow through and make sure it's working as expected. Okay, so let's flatten it out a little bit and talk about how this breaks down. So we said if it's going to be 8 weeks and we want to apply 25%, 50%, 25%, our baseline, our strongman is going to be, we want to put 2 weeks into our visualization exercise, 4 weeks into the development, and 2 weeks into testing. That is a baseline, and every organization will differ. That's my big caveat there. These next adjustment factors, it's part art, part science. The culture, so we talked a little bit about, there's existing governance processes in place, and it could be review structures, it could be toll gates, stage gates. You know, some of the Six Sigma companies have very rigid timelines between and very specific documentation that needs to occur at different stages. That'll drive the critical path usually. The mobile effort will fit inside of that. So understand, you know, what existing governance and culture we're going to, and processes and acceptance, et cetera, we're going to have to work through. The existing SDLC can apply to custom applications, but we're probably going to need to adjust it for mobile. We need to think through the speed and agility we're going to require for the iterative processes under the mobile. We're going to think through the device types. So we talked about that. Is it a tablet? Is it a phone? You design differently. The screens look different. The code is different. So we want to think through that. And the code is more different, I should say, not necessarily phone versus tablet, but more between operating systems. A Java Android application won't work on an iPhone, which is based on Objective-C. The integration, you know, we talked a little bit about integrations heavily leverageable. If you've got an ESB or service bus or service structure in your organization today, mobile can typically heavily leverage that. And the final piece here is just the business rules. So if there's an enterprise business rules engine, you know, if there's a data master data source, you know, those are, you know, perfectly leverageable by mobile. If the pieces we need are not mobile friendly, then, you know, there may be host effort and roles required. So over the course of the project, there's several roles, you know, to fill this baseline FTE. There's the UX designer would be heavily involved in the first couple of weeks. The developer, you know, different developer skills, whether it's whichever iOS we're on, would apply heavily in the middle, and then the testing skills would apply toward the end. So with that, at least now what we can do is we can create okay, we have an 8-screen application, you know, roughly it's going to take 8 weeks. We can do the FTE assessment. And now we need to go back and do our adjustments. We need to think through, is it a time adjustment? Is it just an effort adjustment? So from a critical path standpoint, I just put together some samples of some of the things that would apply to adjust the time and effort. And the interesting thing is each of these same line items will apply differently to each time box. So in our first time box, our visualization time box, the corporate culture, you know, depending on if we're mobile friendly or if we have a long stage gate process, plus or minus a week, just to get our approvals and reviews in place. Along those same lines, where the integration and the on-app, off-app synchronization, those will, have adjustments and effort impacts in the development and maybe the testing, not really for the visualization. These are the screen mock-ups. So even though those may be important things to consider for development, when we're doing our visualization, the key factors are going to be, the corporate governance. When we're getting into the look and feel of the content specifically to this mobile app, or we're reading it in from a content management source, how it's going to look, that becomes pretty critical when we're doing the visualization. Likewise, if we're going to visualize or mock up the Android screens, we have a whole separate effort. Once we understand the flow is reusable. We'll draw the screens for Android. It's a whole separate effort to draw the screens for iOS. It's a whole separate effort to draw the screens for BlackBerry, etc. Critical to mobile, different to mobile, if you will. And the last piece is the branding. So again, in the mobile world, the brand, the user experience, all these become top of mind. If it's the first mobile app, we don't have necessarily the right size or the colors. You don't have the right size or colors. It becomes critical from a branding perspective to spend a little bit of time and build that in your mobile application. You don't want each mobile application you roll out to look like a different look and feel from a different company. You want them to start looking the same. So build your time in up front. Okay? So if we take these same time and effort adjustment factors and now apply it to the development track, it looks a lot different. So the corporate culture here, from a development and approval and SDLC and agile sprints, the integration becomes something that we can add FTE. Maybe we won't add time, but we can, our integration architect now can work in parallel with our development architect. So some of these factors are just add an extra resource. Some of these factors are add extra time. So again, when we're talking about different operating systems, it's a second development effort, flat out. My star here talks a little bit about the MADP, so we'll save some time here in the end and talk a little bit about that. And there is some reuse, in this cycle specifically. Just as a quick overview, the MADP and visualization still need to mock up to 2 or 3 different operating looks that you want. In the application development, there will be some reuse in the core code. But when you get down to the testing, you're actually going to need to do testing on a per OS, even though it was sourced from the same MADP. Okay, so a little aside there. So let's come back now and our adjustments that we're going to apply. Time adjustment, FTE adjustment. So if we roll out 2 applications, one iOS and Android, we can probably keep the same timeline, but we would want to add an Android tester on top of maybe the iOS tester. We would add time extensions if we had complicated integrations, if there was dynamic content that we needed to consider and we needed to test through. Again, if there's specific timelines and requirements before we roll out to production, we would also have to follow the stage gates and corporate policies for that. So these are most of the factors that would go into adjusting the timeline. Okay, so let's apply that to an example now. We'll give you some ideas of how that would look. Talk a little bit about an interaction flow, the actual storyboard. We'll slice that up into some of the screens. We'll talk about the screen visualization steps all the way down through the SDLC. So from an app planning standpoint, the first thing you do is scope it. So what's the application going to do? We need a login. There's a primary admin. We're going to create a PIN. We need to maybe do an LDAP authentication back through the firewall. Right out of the gate, we're going to have a data entry form. We're going to have to capture maybe the photo and a signature. We're going to do a handshake back to the corporate system, maybe check the data, et cetera, et cetera. So, at least at the business flow, we want to understand through a disiterative approach, before we ever code, before we ever design a screen, just understand what's going to occur. Once we understand what's going to occur and everyone agrees that this is basically what's going to be, what the app is going to do, we're answering questions as we go. So our UX experts can group these interactions as screens, keeping them clean, keeping them interactive, intuitive. But as we see this, we're seeing data dependencies. We're seeing integration needs. We're seeing some of the wireless handshaking. So as we walk through our flow, if we remember the first questions that we need to ask ourselves, this answers the key questions. So, you know, this is not an application maybe that would have a shopping cart. This is operational in nature. The form factor, we're going to have to do a picture, we're going to have to do signature capture. It lends itself to a tablet. It looks like there will be some offline, so we want to be able to do these signature captures and photo captures and everything and then sync it back to a server. We'll probably need some enterprise data. We will want a rules engine as to what information we do and don't need, what's required back into the system, and we're going to need to authenticate. We didn't really see, as we talked through this perhaps in this example, we didn't really see any crazy custom controls. We think we can get by with what comes out of the box as far as the layouts and the gestures and forms. Perhaps in our enterprise, we're Android specific or iOS specific. In this example, I just chose, you know, iOS, the Apple platform, and our UX experts and architects have taken a look at it and sized it up and sectioned out our flow into, you know, we'll call it approximately 8 screens. So just based on, you know, discovery and the scoping and sizing and the operational flow, we are able to answer a lot of the questions that will help us size it. So if we talk about the process beyond that now, the very specific things, we've developed our storyboard, and what we want to do is section it off, create the screen visualizations, then we'll get into our build and test, and we'll get into our QA. Let's talk about the first 25% as we outlined before, the storyboard and visualization. So the visualization, and this is the critical part to mobile, you know, mobile first and the rich user experience. You want to take your application concept. As we went through the flow, we identified different fields and different things we needed to show, form entry, picture capture, signature capture, etc. So, you know, you flip chart, whiteboard this, you get it digital so you can kind of see your spacing and layout, and distribute this to your user base, and then pixel perfect. That's what this is called when you get it into a Photoshop and actually lay it out and take a look at what the screens are going to look like. This you would want to make, you know, clickable, be able to distribute that and demonstrate this for your user buy-in. So the first, you know, if it's an 8-screen application, the first quarter, we'll spend a couple of weeks laying out the screens, doing the visual design, creating the clickable. You know, with this, we'll basically finalize the scope before we get into development. We want our acceptance out of this. Our experience will show us how many screens, our overall flow, gestures, popovers, you know, we'll verify our OS versions. Device resolutions become critical, even in, well, regardless of platform, I should say. You have to plan your digital assets, your pictures, your graphics, your buttons. You have to plan those for the resolution of the various devices. So once we're through that first 25%, we have our user acceptance, and we're able to go build. So the middle part of the project now, we develop our agile development plan. So literally build out the stories. The stories are the flow. The application developers are able to create their tasks based on what needs to occur per screen, what integration exercises need to occur. The UX guys are helping with any additional assets. We should have those from our prototype and mock-ups. We create our task backlog. So this structure is common, agile, and fully leverageable in the enterprise systems that you have today. The process would be the same. The difference would be the skill sets you would need here would be, you know, Java developers and Objective-C type developers rather than maybe a .NET or something. So from a mobile perspective, it's architected around a model view controller. So the model and the controller becomes the core logic. The view becomes all the different screens that we have mock-ups for. We think through the local database design, all the security encryption, and we're designing and building all of that in our middle 50% of the project. Okay. The last quarter of the project is our QA and acceptance. To do that, we have simulators. There's physical mobile devices. You know, there's so many there's so many Android devices out there today. It's important to get to the device and make sure we're testing on the devices we're going to support. But realistically, the simulators help us get our first cut and get the feedback quickly to the developers. So from a testing plan, and this is, again, heavily leverageable from some of the testing structures you have today, the nuances would be some of the positive and negative testing, the integration rules. When you get into mobile, there's more of a memory type check. You really want to do the break check, you know, multiple button push and the gestures and things. When you're dealing with the wireless device also, there's timeout, you know, so we take a call, we flip over to a different app, we come back, and there's a lot of, you know, nuances around that. And again, when we're checking the per device, where we get down to the per device acceptance, the resolution, and the UX standards. There's an approval process when you go to the Google Play Store or the iTunes App Store. The application has to meet certain specifications for being published. So you want to design for that, and you want to make sure when in the testing cycle you're checking for that too. So in our last 25% of the overall SDLC, we're testing the screen flow and combinations. We're testing our custom controls, the synchronization. There's so many combinations, you need to really think through that, and the enterprise integration and security. From a native OS standpoint, again, we want to make sure the users are actually accepting on the devices and not just on simulators. Okay, so if we roll all that up and put it in a box, we understand that our first 2 weeks is visualization, our middle 4 weeks is our application development, and we have different milestones, agile reviews, SME reviews, if you will, and then our final 2 weeks is testing. At that point, all planning comes to the head, and after acceptance, you're able to submit for approval to the app stores. In that last QA piece, you're also creating the artifacts and assets that would go up with the description, the screenshots, et cetera, the specifications for the application that goes up on the storefront. So if we roll it up, and from all the observations and all the adjustments we need to make, I didn't go through and make adjustments to this one on some of the complexity. At this point, we have our full-time UX architect and the mobile solutions architect, basically, that would be part-time on this, and he or she would support that at a 0.5 FTE. In the development, we need the developer full-time, the integration architect. We knew we needed to reach in and do the LDAP or authentication. So we found, you know, a couple of weeks worth of integration work, and then a mobile architect overseeing the specifications and standards for the operating systems. In the last 2 weeks, our tester is our full-time FTE. During testing, there's defects and bugs. Our developer is a part-time resource, and our integration architect is a part-time resource to be able to quickly resolve in the testing iterations, resolve whether it's an application code defect or an integration defect or data defect. So that those part-time roles, approximately 2.5 FTEs applied within the 2 weeks, and our mobile architect is also reviewing our final product to make sure it's going to be acceptable. So we talked a little bit about, you know, based on, you know, the different, whether it's what region you're in, what consulting contracts you have in place. You've got a lot of, you know, corporate agreements. What I did was just to keep the math simple, I assumed $100 average per hour. These roles can go, $80 to $150 based on experience. At 1.5, basically this relatively simple, 8-screen app. We're looking at maybe $12K up front, another $32K for the development integration pieces, and another $20K as far as the testing. So $64K from an enterprise secure, enterprise integrated, single OS developed and deployed application. That's basically what this example would articulate. Okay. So it kind of wraps up how and why, what we would do, and how some of the rule of thumb approaches would apply. I do want to spend just a couple more minutes here and just do some quick tips and tricks, and I'll turn it over to Adam so we can take a few questions here. So the first 3 bullets on this, mobile specific, just top of mind, prototyping is the absolute best investment you will make on your mobile project. Spend the time you need, get your stakeholder feedback, do it iteratively. It'll reduce your overall development risk and any cost related to changes. The second most important thing is once you have your prototype in flow, make it clickable, make it installable, get it in the hands of the users, get the feedback in pilot and test mode rather than full deployment and having to react quickly to issues. The nice thing is we have some nice prototyping tools, especially in the iOS platform. 98% plus reuse when you're doing your mock-ups. The mock-ups and assets that you create easily translate over to the actual development exercise. And the last, core mobile piece is the application architecture. We talked a little bit about the model, view, controller. The model and controller are the core pieces of the application. The model is the mathematical behavior of the app. The controller tells it how to behave based on the user input, and the view is your screen. So understanding those, following the standards, will make sure that your application is maintainable, it will scale, and it's stable. Some of the learnings just carry forward. This goes in the same old category, but anyone that's been around the enterprise applications for any time, just understand the role of your enterprise steering committee. Understand that the strong business thought leadership in the early mock-ups and processes will make sure that you have a better work product. From a mobile perspective, build your heavy data processing off the mobile device. So leverage your massive servers and memory and processors that you can get in the enterprise to do your logic and business rules, and then pass that to the mobile device. Another specific thing to mobile, plan for immediate user feedback. So, excuse me, the users in mobile world have quick thumbs up, thumbs down, 2-star, 1-star, 5-star ratings there, and quick notes back to the storefronts. So expect that. They'll be candid, it'll be high volume, and if we want to reduce any attrition off of the application, we want to make sure our user adoption stays high, make sure we're responsive to that and able to react. Just to help set expectations, clearly outline which devices and OS versions that are supported. So if it's for Jelly Bean or Gingerbread or whatever on Android, make sure you're specifically stating that these are the application versions, OS versions, and devices. It just inherently creates testing risk and potentially acceptance risk. For internal enterprise mobile device management deployments, so if we're not looking at the iTunes store, this is an internal deployment. It's critical that well before we deploy, make sure the targeted users have already signed up and are on the MDM platform so we can push the app to them and not have that delay. And from a experience of the resources we're going to use on a project and the roles we're going to need, keep in mind these aren't SAP, multi-year deployments. These are very short sprints, very tight timelines with very few resources. So, low cost perhaps may not be the best way to go. You would want the thought leadership, you would want the senior architects that can also develop the languages. In iOS, it's Objective-C, Xcode, Java, BlackBerry's Java and Eclipse, Windows, Visual Studio, the web. There's several tools for that, but basically it's JavaScript, HTML5, and CSS. And when you're looking at the application development platforms, the cross-platforms, most are coded in JavaScript and then either compile real-time or pre-compile and install on the devices. The integration preferences on the mobile is the JSON, JSON and RESTful services. The XML SOAP that you probably have in your environment today is fully leverageable, but JSON's preferred for performance. In our cross-platform tool-specific instances, those come into play when we're looking at maybe 2 or more operating systems. Good fits when the core in-app logic is complicated. Not such a good fit if each of the screen is actually load. The MADPs require separate views, separate work on each of the screens. But if there's a lot of logic and business logic built into the app, then probably a good play. Or JavaScript, if you have internal JavaScript resources and skills, since that's the core platform, that may be another reason to take a close look at that. So in conclusion, I just want to thank you for the time today. I'm going to hand it back over to Adam here in a second. The last piece, there was a question that came in when we did the registrations about the mobile application ongoing support. We touched on it. I don't want to just kind of emphasize this, though. The feedback will be immediate. Plan to capture and prioritize the feedback. There'll be great ideas, some issues, some enhancements, but you'll want to assign a product manager or an application manager that can be responsible, basically front that, and a skeleton development team so that you'll be able to turn around any enhancements in a phase 1A quick response. So as wrap up, storyboard and interaction flow. Create your basic strawman timeline. Adjust based on effort, FTE effort, challenges, corporate culture, complexity. The SDLC visualization is key. Iteratively build, and then the enterprise testing with the ongoing support. So that's pretty much wraps up the sizing, the timing, and I hope that that gives you some ideas for how your company can maybe identify and apply some of the approaches we discussed here today. Understanding your critical path, your critical roles, and some of the governance overhead that you need to comply with. As we saw, mobile applications are top CIO priorities today, so it's on all of our plates. So with that, I want to turn this back over to Adam. We'll take a few questions, and I want to thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you very much, Larry. That was great. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function on the WebEx screen. As I mentioned up front, we wanted to conclude this webinar with a special offer. A lot of you are interested in sizing mobile app development efforts, and one of the best ways that we've found is to engage in a rapid prototype assessment. And we've developed a mobile app rapid prototype kickstart. This is one of our most popular kickstarts. In 1 week, you can get from idea to a working prototype on a phone or on a tablet, in addition to the storyboard and the interaction flow that Larry described. We also look at the technical architecture, the resources needed, and the sizing effort. And in 1 week, you're able to have a great idea of what your app looks like and the sizing. In addition to our Kickstart, we're offering 20 hours of mobile advisory services with the purchase of our prototype Kickstart. We also have a number of other Kickstarts that you can peruse on our website, propelics.com. And now I think we'll dive into some Q&A with a few minutes remaining. So Larry, our first question comes from Daryl, and his question is, are automated testing tools worth it for mobile?
So I'm going to give you two perspectives on this. So the mobile testing tools can be valuable. I would suggest that for your first releases, the testing that you would do on an automated platform would not be as valuable on your first pass through. But once you test it, you create the scripts, and I think that the testing scripts would better apply to second and third releases. So it's more the regression testing support where the automation tools would help you rather than the first go.
Great, thanks. And just a reminder, we will be, the slides and the recording will be available on our website later on today and tomorrow morning, and we'll be sending an email with that information to all of you. The next question comes from Andrew, and he asks, what is the typical size of a pilot deployment for a simple mobile application? So that is, Larry, what is the typical size of a pilot deployment for a simple mobile application?
So a great question as far as the scope. So you want to pick a specific business unit and you want to pick a specific device typically for your pilot. Enterprise customers have, historically, they have some super user groups. So once we understand which roles and which users and which scenarios we're going to apply, within that scenario, it's important to figure out the logical groupings. It may be geographical, it may be by role. So the sizing of that on mobile, a good span would be 2 or 3 of the roles. If there's maybe 4 or 5 roles included, you want to pick up most of the roles. And we've done pilots as big as 50. We've done pilots as small as 8 to 10. So I would suggest that the more important thing rather than the number would be make sure you have a good cross-section of the devices that you're going to touch, the roles that are going to be engaged, and the platforms that you're going to deploy on.
Great, thanks. The next question comes from Evan, and Evan asks, in your opinion, what roles belong in-house and what should be outsourced to a partner? Which one should be outsourced to a partner?
Okay, I think that one's actually a common one. The approach that we've recommended in the past, since mobile is new in most organizations, the recommendation is the mobile experts, the mobile architects, play heavy roles. This would be the mobile UX experts. This would be the actual app development experts. What you want to do is create a joint team so that the internal staff, you can use the project itself to ramp up your skill sets. So you would want to make hires as mobile becomes more of a priority. You would want to make your strategic hires for the UX architects, the specialists with the Photoshop, the user experience, and you would want to hire to the platform technologies that you're going to support it. So use the third-party teams hand in hand for your first project, heavily weighted towards the experienced, probably third party. Maybe on your second application, maybe a 50-50 split, you start taking more responsibility. By the time you do your third mobile application, you can pare down the third party resources and your internal staff would be ready to take the training wheels off. They would be able to do the user experience and do the application build, setting yourself up for longer term success and scalability rather than always depending on third party.
Great. The next question is from Jill. How do traditional PMO milestones need to change for mobile application development, or do they?
So the PMO milestones, what I would suggest is we would take a look at the PMO in conjunction with the Center of Excellence. A lot of the application development teams, especially as we see the mobile maturing, we would have Center of Excellence standards, whether it would be the marketing, branding flavors, whether it would be the application development, integration, security standards, et cetera. Those milestones are typically span a little bit too broad for what mobile timeline, mobile speed is today. So one of the critical things I would suggest is take a look from a strawman perspective. We were talking in terms of an 8-screen application, a 242. Take a look and see what documentation is required, and see the PMO milestones today. And what we recommend in the past is a PMO light review. So there are critical pieces that you want to accomplish, but maybe not every checkbox needs to be included or is even necessary for a mobile application.
Great, and with that, we're running up to the end of the hour. I'd like to thank everyone for attending our webinar on how to size a mobile app development effort. We were able to get the slides up on our website already, so if you go to Propelics resources at the end of the webinar, you'll be able to download the slides right away. So again, thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Have a great day. Bye.